Is it time for a reset of inventory strategies? Dr. Larry Parker is Department Chair of Transportation and Logistics Management, Supply Chain Management, Reverse Logistics, and Government Contracting at the Dr. Wallace E. Boston School of Business in the American Public University System. Hello, Dr. Parker.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for being with me today. So, what did we see happen to retail inventory levels over the last 2 years?
Well, what we really saw was a dramatic drop, and I say drop in retail inventory levels because of the disruption in supply chain. And I want to just preface this, so where the conversation may likely go is there was a bottleneck for a period of time, and now we're going to see a spike. So just taking from your question, over the last few years, we saw a real drop in the inventory levels. Then we had dealt with this bottleneck and this delays and port issues. And now, if people have been paying attention, there's been a large number of increases in mitigation strategies put in place.
Mm-hmm. That suggests that retailers and merchandisers might have overcompensated, because if there is a glut, it means that it's not flowing through to consumer buying at this point. So is that in fact the case?
That is in fact the case. And if, those of us that have been in supply chain for a while, that there was an adoption of the just in time and some of those philosophies.
Sure.
And you saw a reduction in storage capacity at a number of locations. Places that when I was a young man, you'd go and get a box of shoes or get some shoes or something, and there was storage in the back. And that's not the case so much anymore now. So things are getting there just in time. And now you're likely to see containers in the parking lots, or retailers trying to find ways to handle the inventory that they have now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought it also might have something to do with the release of pent-up demand. I mean, once consumers started buying again, they were demanding this stuff, and it was flowing in these containers that were getting congested. But you're suggesting that was still in excess of what it is they actually needed. Right?
Yes, and what they're seeing now, as a way, and you mentioned that, as a way of trying to mitigate problems that they experienced last year. A number of retailers trying to get ahead or coming up with ways to work around, they sought other ways to get their goods. And now that glut has made its way through, they're having to balance that out and really have to adjust. And so you may see that in the pricing to retail to consumers. There may be some other losses that some of the retailers are having to hit or take because they don't have the storage capacity, nor do they want to incur the costs that are associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff's got to go somewhere. We hear a lot of retailers who talked about shipping or ordering their end of year holiday merchandise earlier this year. Yet another reason why more stuff was coming in early, right?
Exactly. What I would challenge people now as they look around, containers that they normally would have seen at holiday time at some of their favorite retailers are already in the parking lots. Why? Yeah. Because those that were in the pipeline have made it through. And I'm noticing more retailers are actually utilizing those as inventory space because, like I said, what you see are those big buildings that are transitory places for some of the major retailers that are popped up across the countryside. Those aren't made for storage. Those are made for transition of intermodal products.
Yeah. So clearly, though, this amount of inventory that's sitting there in wherever, there's an expectation to some extent that it isn't going to be absorbed by consumer demand at the end of the year, not if Target and other big retailers are writing down inventory. They're kind of giving up on it and saying, no, this isn't, what's going on there? I mean, why don't they trust that this inventory will flow through at peak season?
Well, and again, it's the challenge of what we were just seeing. There's no storage, and at least what leadership within organizations are starting to recognize is that it is eventually going to hit them at the bottom line, and it's the product in many cases, because we've outsourced as far as we could go. That the product itself, and maybe many of them don't want to admit it, is a lot less expensive than the storage or transportation costs.
Mhm.
And so a lot of them aren't willing to reverse logistics, take the things back and store them because they don't have the capacity. And it's just more cost effective for them to just take the loss or write down those items, as like you alluded to. Target just says, we have all these things through the pipeline. Some of them, if you think about it, are out of season. So they would actually have to sit on them a much longer because
Right.
if they were coming through in the spring or something. So those are the challenges.
Right. And not only do we have the just-in-time strategy proving itself not to be a good idea now, you had the longer supply lines that were developed over the last couple of decades as so much manufacturing was offshored to Asia, China especially. Do you believe, Dr. Parker, that these trends we're seeing now are going to lead to a rethinking of sourcing, to the shortening of sourcing lines to the point where we might see a nearshoring or reshoring of manufacturing back to the Western Hemisphere to avoid similar problems in future?
Yes, and there's no other way to make that happen but to do that. Had this been a shorter phenomenon, I would have said leadership would have resisted it because it would have been harder to argue the financial implications of it. But because the pandemic and this disruption lasted for so long, just like we're seeing in other capacities, remote work and things of this nature, leadership can't deny it. Mm-hmm. And so the costs are so large in order to use air or some other way to ensure items are there, are arriving on time. It's actually reasonable for them to start looking for other manufacturing. And the other thing that's working to their benefit, and this is just looking at, a lot of individuals are looking for more customization. So they can also look at that, okay, well, a lot of customers are looking for things that possibly would have to be touched again or possibly have some rationale for doing it in a manufacturing closer to home.
Customization demands agility, does it not? I mean, you bring in a generic type of product and then you've determined what's needed in order to customize it to specific customer needs. Then you got to move fast to do it. So I think at that point, the distance has to be relatively short, right?
Absolutely. And so, you know, we see that with all of the different centers that are popping up, and you're seeing delivery that are happening so much faster. And to have that competitive advantage, you have to be able to respond in that shorter time frame. Yeah.
So going forward, what do you see? The challenge of trying to balance just in time with just in case, inventory with cost, distance versus the, you know, all these factors. I guess it's just going to be a balancing act for the foreseeable future, right? How do you see it?
Well, I can tell you I'm excited because, you know, to be a person in the supply field, oftentimes and this is just taking a little personal, we were playing second to individuals that were in charge of outsourcing and going further and further because it was easier to find the product being produced cheaper than to address transportation and you know, some of the logistics issues. So now supply chain is now coming to the forefront of planning. So those individuals in supply chain profession are going to have a little bit more say and are actually going to be able to be proven right that we need to mitigate. So I can see a rise in some form of increased, at least temporary storage. There has to be something. There's going to be probably a rise in business of individuals looking at maybe some of those remote spaces or those industrial areas that are no longer being utilized, may be converted to storage because those retailers and locations that never planned, even in their construction for storage, they don't want to be caught like this again.
Yeah.
Then you're going to look at some of that technology we've been talking about for a while, the automation, the blockchain, those things that increase in-transit visibility, and not just visibility, because we've had that for a while, but actions. So that's where blockchain comes in. And so where individuals can take action earlier to possibly mitigate any of these issues. So that's where I can really see a number of things going. And just culturally, you can see more of a move towards green logistics. And what I mean by green is just we already are trying to reduce the costs. So now we're going to see that reduction in packaging and those other things that we're not traveling in the large bulk that we have, or we're not transporting in large bulk. So those are, I'd say, top three that I can see happening now.
You must be telling your students, you guys are going to be really important going forward.
That's what I'm saying. You can poke your chest out now, because I've heard more people say supply chain than I've ever heard.
Everybody knows what it means, and
Yes,
the people you're teaching now are tomorrow's supply chain professionals are going to be in a really great position. Absolutely. Fantastic. Dr. Larry Parker of the American Public University System, I want to thank you so much for chatting about these big changes in inventory sourcing and strategies and what it might look like going forward. Thanks very much for your time.
Bob, I appreciate it. Thank you.